I was framed and kicked out of the family company, so I built my own company and destroyed it. The day my family cast me out remains etched in my memory, a vivid tableau of betrayal and rain-soaked streets. I was 22, fresh out of business school, eager to prove myself within the family enterprise, Whittaker and Sons, a conglomerate built over 3 generations, specializing in shipping and logistics. My grandfather, Silas Whittaker, had transformed a modest regional operation into an international powerhouse. My father, Bernard Whittaker, now held the reins, with my older brother, Clarence, groomed as his successor. It was a dreary Tuesday when I was summoned to the executive conference room on the top floor of our headquarters in Boston. The rain tapped persistently against the expansive windows, mirroring the anxiety that churned within me. As I entered, I was met with the stern faces of my father, brother, and several board members. "Eleanor," my father began, his tone devoid of warmth, "do you understand the gravity of the situation you've put us in?" I swallowed hard, clutching the folder containing the draft contract I'd prepared for the sale of our subsidiary, Whittaker Maritime. Unbeknownst to me, the valuation figures I had used were outdated, failing to account for our recent fleet expansion. The error had been caught before finalization, but the damage to my credibility was done. "Father, I can rectify this," I pleaded. "The contract hasn't been executed yet. Let me correct the figures and—" "Correct it?" Clarence interjected with a derisive chuckle. "You nearly sold our shipping division for half its worth. There's no correcting that level of incompetence." I turned to my father, seeking a glimmer of understanding. "I've been working 80-hour weeks, juggling multiple deals. I admit I made a mistake, but I only wanted to prove myself." My father's expression remained impassive. "Intentions don't safeguard our legacy, Eleanor. Results do. The board has lost confidence in your judgment. Effective immediately, your position at Whittaker and Sons is terminated." The word struck like a physical blow. I felt the weight of generations pressing down, the suffocating realization that I had been deemed unworthy of the family name. That evening, as I packed my belongings under the watchful eyes of security, my grandfather Silas found me. His once robust frame seemed diminished, his eyes clouded with disappointment, not in me, but in the situation. "Eleanor," he said softly, "sometimes the ones we trust the most can lead us astray. Remember, the strength of a Whittaker isn't measured by their fall, but by how they rise afterward." I nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I don't know where to go from here, Grandpa." He placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. "Take this time to learn, to grow. The world is vast, and our family's shadow doesn't stretch as far as you might think." With that, I left the Whittaker estate, the rain masking the tears on my cheeks, determined to forge a path beyond the confines of my family's expectations. That night, as the relentless rain subsided into a quiet drizzle, I found myself checking into a modest motel on the outskirts of Boston. The sterile lobby and the humming fluorescent lights offered little comfort, yet they marked the beginning of a life I was determined to reshape. I clutched a worn leather briefcase that held the remnants of my former world, notes, project drafts, and the backup copy of the contract that had cost me everything. Every page of that file resonated with my past dedication to Whittaker and Sons and, more painfully, with the betrayal I had endured. In the solitude of my small room, I spent hours replaying that fateful day. I remembered every word exchanged in the conference room, the cold finality in my father Bernard's tone, and Clarence's dismissive laugh that echoed in my ears. The harsh pronouncement of termination had been the end of one chapter, but it also ignited a fierce determination within me. I realized that while I had been condemned by my family's expectations, I still held the key to my own future. I set up a makeshift workstation at the motel, a rickety desk near the window with a view of the dimly lit street below. The backup copy of the contract became my focal point. As I compared it to the final version that had been presented at the meeting, a disturbing realization emerged. The formatting was different. Subtle changes in spacing, altered numerical values, and even minor tweaks in language hinted at deliberate tampering. The file on my encrypted drive was pristine, the original I had crafted meticulously during countless long nights. Someone had interfered with my work before it ever reached the board. A chill of betrayal mixed with a burning resolve surged through me. I began cross-referencing every detail, the valuation figures, the contractual clauses, and the metadata timestamps that marked each revision. The evidence pointed toward an external manipulation, but I could not yet be sure of its source. In my heart, however, I suspected that Clarence's smug certainty earlier was not enough to distract him from the real culprit. My mind returned to the hushed words of my grandfather, Silas Whittaker. His gentle admonition, reminding me that true strength lay not in avoiding failure but in rising from it, echoed in my thoughts as I worked late into the night. In the weeks that followed, I rented a small apartment in a quieter neighborhood, far from the imposing Whitaker estate yet close enough to keep a watchful eye on the industry news. With little more than a modest savings account and an unwavering commitment, I resolved to build a new venture, one founded on transparency, meticulous research, and the very principles that my family had long abandoned in pursuit of appearances. I named my fledgling enterprise, Merit Logistics Solutions, after an old family friend whose name, like mine, was seldom spoken but carried the weight of integrity and quiet determination. Each morning, as dawn broke over the city, I combed through industry reports and financial statements of Whitaker & Sons. I began to piece together inconsistencies that had gone unnoticed by the board, a series of decisions and contracts that painted a picture of mismanagement and subtle sabotage. My investigation led me to obscure clauses hidden in the fine print of agreements, clauses that hinted at contingency plans I had once designed in earnest. One such clause, carefully embedded in the original maritime contract, granted the original signatory a right of first refusal on certain shipping routes if a restructuring took place. I recalled inputting that clause as a safeguard, a small detail meant to protect the company's long-term interests. Now, it emerged as a beacon of hope in my quest for vindication. Late one evening, as I sat in my dimly lit study surrounded by scattered documents and a half-empty cup of coffee, I received a cryptic text message on my aging cell phone. The message was from a number I recognized from past conversations with my grandfather. It read simply, "Seek the truth in the details." Though brief, it reinforced my belief that someone within the inner circle had manipulated the contract, and that the true intent behind those alterations would eventually be revealed. Emboldened by this subtle confirmation, I reached out to a trusted mentor from my business school days, a reserved and insightful individual named Virgil. Virgil had always emphasized the importance of data integrity and the power of forensic accounting. I explained my findings in cautious detail, and he agreed to help me review the digital evidence. Over several intensive sessions, we uncovered a series of modifications that were not part of my original draft, each change designed to obscure the real financial risk that had been meticulously calculated by me. Virgil's expertise confirmed what I had feared: the modifications were deliberate, likely orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of my work and a vested interest in my failure. The revelations hit me with a dual force of despair and determination. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. It was not merely the fault of an isolated mistake but the result of calculated actions meant to discredit me and to consolidate power within the Whitaker legacy. I resolved, then and there, that I would not only reclaim what was unjustly taken from me but also expose the manipulation that had undermined our company's integrity. As my days blurred into nights of research and cautious planning, I began laying the groundwork for Merit Logistics Solutions to expand beyond its humble beginnings. I sought partnerships with small shipping companies that had been overlooked by larger competitors, and I steadily built a reputation for honesty and precision in an industry often marred by corporate politicking. Every contract I signed, every supplier I vetted, was a deliberate step toward creating a business that valued transparency over flashy figures. Meanwhile, whispers of mismanagement began circulating in industry circles. Analysts noted discrepancies in Whitaker & Sons' quarterly reports, and murmurs about the true state of the company's finances started to surface in trade publications. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth would emerge. In the meantime, I maintained a delicate balance. Publicly, I remained a quiet entrepreneur focused on solving logistics challenges. Privately, I was piecing together a case that would someday force my family to confront the errors of their ways. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every meeting with skeptical yet curious clients, and every late-night conversation with Virgil reinforced my belief that integrity could triumph over deceit. I documented everything meticulously, creating a digital archive that recorded every anomaly, every sign of the tampering. I was preparing for a reckoning, a moment when the long-suppressed truth would come to light, and I would finally be vindicated. The road to redemption was fraught with uncertainty, yet it was also filled with the promise of renewal. I was no longer the naive protégé who had once believed in a family legacy built solely on reputation. I was now a determined, independent mind forging my own path, a path that, while different from the one my family had envisioned, was rooted in the same principles of hard work and accountability. With every passing day, Merit Logistics Solutions grew. Small contracts turned into larger projects, and clients began to see the value in working with someone who treated every detail with the utmost care. The business landscape was evolving, and I was positioning myself at the forefront of that change, ready to challenge the established order and to redefine what true leadership meant. As I sat at my desk one crisp morning, reviewing yet another report that hinted at the flawed practices of Whittaker and Sons, I felt a quiet resolve settle over me. The betrayal that had once nearly broken my spirit was now the very force that drove me forward. I knew that in time, the evidence I had gathered would not only clear my name but also force my family to reckon with the consequences of their actions. Until then, I would continue to work diligently, building a future where truth and transparency reigned supreme. 3 years into running Merit Logistics Solutions, my quiet, measured strategy was beginning to bear fruit. What had started as a one-person consulting outfit in a rented co-working space had grown into a respected logistics advisory firm with 12 employees, a modest downtown office, and a roster of clients that had once belonged to Whittaker and Sons. I remained out of the spotlight by design. I rarely attended public events, never gave interviews, and ensured Merit's name was known for operational excellence, not drama. My name, Eleanor Quinn Whittaker, didn't appear on the website. On paper, I was just the founder. In practice, I was the architect behind every deal, every supply chain audit, and every successful turnaround. Meanwhile, trouble had begun to seep into the public image of Whittaker and Sons. At first, it was small, a string of missed shipments on their Pacific Northwest route, followed by supplier disputes and a few murmurs of customer dissatisfaction. Clarence was still being paraded as the visionary next-generation leader. His photos appeared in business magazines, standing on shipping docks in tailored suits, always smiling, always flanked by our parents. But behind those magazine covers, the cracks were widening. My sources, former employees who had quietly left or been pushed out, began reaching out. They shared stories of cost-cutting measures that made no operational sense, of shady internal audits, and of a leadership team unwilling to listen. I took careful notes. I never pushed. I just listened and recorded, building a picture. And then, about 2 years before everything changed, I received a package. It was left at my office door after hours. Inside, a folder marked with my grandfather's initials, SMW, in his thin, careful handwriting. No note. No explanation. Within it were handwritten memos and emails printed from an internal Whittaker system, correspondence between Clarence and a junior compliance officer. The memos revealed 2 things. First, that Clarence had known about the valuation error in the Polaris freight contract before it had reached the board. Second, that he had instructed the legal team to quietly proceed without correcting it, suggesting I take the fall to preserve confidence in leadership. The words made my skin go cold. I had suspected. I had theorized. But here, at last, was proof, in my grandfather's own files, that I had not only been wrongly blamed, but deliberately sacrificed. That night, I stayed in my office until dawn. I read each page again and again. My grandfather had known. And for reasons I didn't yet understand, he had waited. Perhaps he had hoped my father or Clarence would confess. Perhaps he was waiting for the right moment to act. Or perhaps, he was waiting for me to be ready. In the months that followed, I grew bolder. I reached out to silent shareholders of Whittaker and Sons, quiet partners who had been sidelined in the leadership shuffle over the past decade. I offered insight into the company's operations. I asked questions no one else was asking. Why were certain key shipping routes hemorrhaging money? Why had so many strategic partners left without explanation? Why had a stable division like Polaris been downsized so aggressively? I didn't accuse. I simply presented data. And some of them began to listen. My grandfather had taught me well. He used to say, real influence isn't loud. It sits quietly at the table and outlasts everyone else. He believed in patience, in preparedness, and in the long view, a philosophy that now guided my every step. Meanwhile, Whittaker and Sons was struggling under the weight of its own reputation. The firm still looked solid to the outside world, but internally, it was eroding. That became clear when one of my sources, a longtime finance director I trusted, quietly forwarded me a draft of a plan Clarence had authored, a massive restructuring of the maritime division. The same division I'd once been accused of mishandling. I scanned the document and stopped cold at Section 4. The restructuring would involve reassignment of Pacific trade routes and offloading certain West Coast assets to investors, all of which would trigger the clause I had buried in the original Polaris freight contract over a decade earlier. The clause that gave me, as the original signatory, first right of refusal on any Pacific Rim shipping routes or infrastructure affected by restructuring. They hadn't found it. Not in 10 years. And now, their plan, the one designed to save them, couldn't happen unless I allowed it. It was the turning point. I contacted Virgil, my mentor, and asked him to verify the legal strength of the clause. He spent 3 days combing through my documentation, then called me with a single, breathless sentence: "It's airtight." He was stunned. I was calm. Because I'd been waiting. From that moment on, my path was clear. I began preparing 2 sets of documents, one for a formal claim on the Pacific routes, the other a summary of the manipulated contract, Clarence's cover-up, and the internal correspondence stored in my grandfather's folder. And then, my grandfather died. It was quiet. Peaceful. He passed away in his sleep at the Whittaker family home, the one I hadn't seen in a decade. I found out the same way the public did, through a press release issued by Clarence, praising Silas Whittaker's vision and legacy. I attended the funeral. I stayed in the back. Wore black. Watched quietly. Clarence gave the eulogy. He spoke of integrity and leadership, of lessons passed from father to son. My mother sat beside him, dabbing her eyes. My father, ever stoic, stared ahead as if he were somewhere else entirely. They saw me. But they said nothing. And when the reading of the will was announced, scheduled for 1 week later at the offices of Whittaker and Prescott LLP, I received a formal invitation. No explanation. No warning. Just a sealed envelope and a time. I knew then that my grandfather had orchestrated more than just a delay in justice. He had planned a reckoning. And I would be there for every word of it. The morning of the will reading, the sky was clear, a rarity for late March in Boston. I arrived early at the Whittaker and Prescott building, dressed in a slate blue suit and black leather flats. My hair was tied back simply, my expression composed. I carried no entourage, no legal team. Just one thin leather folder under my arm and a quiet confidence 10 years in the making. The receptionist led me to the conference room, where familiar faces had already gathered: my father, Bernard, stiff and silent; my mother, Beatrice, cool and unreadable as ever; Clarence, seated at the head of the table like he still owned it, flanked by 2 board members who once applauded my dismissal. No one greeted me. But I didn't need acknowledgement. My presence was the message. "Miss Whittaker," said Mr. Gregory Maddox, my grandfather's longtime attorney, rising from his seat at the far end of the table. "Thank you for coming. We'll begin shortly." Clarence glanced at his watch. "Let's keep this brief. There's a shareholder call in 2 hours. I offered him a small smile. "You might want to reschedule that." He frowned. My mother looked sharply at me. My father said nothing. Mr. Maddox opened a sealed envelope and unfolded a thick set of documents. "This is the final will and testament of Mr. Silas M. Whittaker," he said. Per his instructions, all family members and principal board representatives were required to attend in person. He cleared his throat. "I'll begin with standard bequests. To longtime staff, household accounts, personal possessions, charitable donations." The first 10 minutes were quiet, routine. Jewelry and antiques passed to cousins. Donations to local shipping academies. A sizable contribution to the National Maritime History Foundation. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief when he read her name beside the phrase, "for her devotion to tradition." My father nodded slightly when his inheritance was mentioned, the remaining farmland in Vermont. My brother smirked when the boardroom paintings were formally deeded to him. Then Mr. Maddox paused. "What follows pertains to Whittaker and Sons." The temperature in the room dropped. Effective immediately, all voting shares and majority interest held by Silas Whittaker in Whittaker and Sons, totaling 47% of the company's ownership, are to be transferred in full to Eleanor Quinn Whittaker. Silence. I didn't look around. I kept my eyes on the papers in Mr. Maddox's hands. He continued. "Additionally, the family trust shares, representing an additional 11%, shall have all voting rights exercised solely by Eleanor Q. Whittaker until such time as she chooses to redistribute or transfer them." Clarence rose to his feet. "This is absurd. She hasn't been involved in the company for over a decade." "And yet," Mr. Maddox said calmly, "Mr. Whittaker believed she remained the only person who understood the company's foundations and long-term viability." "This isn't legally sound," Clarence said, voice rising. "She was removed from her position." "Based on manipulated documentation," I said quietly, rising for the first time. "Documentation I now have. Along with digital records, email correspondence, and internal memos signed by you, Clarence." My mother flinched. My father looked down at his hands. I was framed, I said, looking directly at my brother. You sabotaged my contract. You knew about the valuation updates and intentionally removed them. You presented altered figures to the board. Lies, he hissed. I slid my folder across the table. It's all here. Metadata. Original timestamps. Grandpa knew. He gathered the evidence and kept it. Waiting for this day. I turned to Mr. Maddox. If I may, I'd like to invoke Clause 9.4 from the Polaris freight contract. He nodded. That clause, I said to the room, grants me the right of first refusal on all Pacific Rim shipping routes and infrastructure assets, in the event of a divisional restructuring. Clarence's mouth opened, then closed again. He knew exactly what I meant. You've planned a restructuring of Polaris to bail out a failed Southeast Asia expansion, I continued. The documents have already been drafted. Your plan is public. The moment you file it, my clause activates. Which means, one of the board members murmured. Which means, I said, you cannot complete the restructure without my approval. Which I do not give. A full beat of silence passed. Mr. Maddox picked up another document. There is also a personal letter from Mr. Whitaker, to be read aloud. He broke the wax seal and began to read in his steady, practiced voice. To my family. You believed that removing Eleanor would stabilize the company. You told yourselves that her absence was a necessity. But it was never about stability. It was about fear. You feared what she represented, change, challenge, and depth. You feared someone who didn't play your game but played one of her own. And so you exiled her. You turned a mistake, caught and corrected, into a public trial. You watched her leave in the rain, convinced she'd disappear. But she didn't. She learned. She grew. And she did what none of you could, she built something on her own. Without our name. Without our resources. Without approval. She earned this. To Eleanor, the company is yours now. Not as a gift, but as restitution. To the rest, reflect on what you lost. Silas M. Whitaker. Mr. Maddox folded the letter and placed it on the table. The room was still. My mother whispered, he planned this the whole time. Clarence sat down heavily. So, what? You think you can run this place? I don't think, I said. I know. And I've been doing it for years. The clients you've lost? I've picked them up. The routes you've neglected? I've restored them. The team you dismissed? I've hired them. Quietly. Competently. Without needing my name on the door. I turned to the board. You have two choices. Stay with this company and rebuild it the right way, under new leadership, or step aside. Either way, Whitaker and Sons will no longer be run by short-sighted egos and manipulated numbers. The board members looked between one another, then back at me. Several nodded. Clarence tried once more. You can't do this. I already have. The following months unfolded in a blur. Headlines exploded, Eleanor Whitaker returns to lead turnaround, Whitaker dynasty shaken by leadership change, quiet builder, reluctant heiress, resilient leader. We rebranded within the year, Whitaker and Sons became Whitaker Global Logistics. The name change wasn't just symbolic. It marked a new era. My father retired within weeks. My mother faded from the public eye. Clarence tried to challenge the will in court. He failed. And I moved into my grandfather's old office. On the wall, I framed two things, the original Polaris contract, unaltered, and the letter he left me. Sometimes, in the early morning before the team arrives, I read it again. Because legacy, I've learned, isn't about what you're given. It's about what you earn. And what you rebuild from ashes. Thank you for watching the video, like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe, have a nice day.